The champagne glass shattered against the hardwood floor, crystal fragments catching the light like fallen stars. My grandmother's ring, the one she promised me since I was 7, gleamed on my cousin Jessica's finger as she laughed with her new fiancé. The sound hit me harder than any slap ever could. My name is Maya Chen. I'm 28 years old, and 30 seconds ago, my Aunt Linda announced that Jessica would inherit grandmother's jewelry collection. All of it. The pieces I'd been promised, the ones I dreamed about, the ones that held every memory of Sunday afternoons spent listening to stories about each gem's journey through our family. Maya understands, and Linda said, her voice carrying across the funeral reception like a judge's verdict. She's practical. Jessica needs these for her wedding, for starting her family properly. She gestured toward the mahogany display case, where grandmother's treasures sparkled under the dim lighting. Maya has her career. She doesn't need sentimental things. I stood frozen by the dessert table, watching Jessica model the sapphire earrings that grandmother wore to her own wedding. The same earrings she'd let me try on countless times, promising they'd be mine someday. Jessica caught my eye and shrugged. Not apologetic, just entitled. She'd always been the favorite, the one who remembered to call, who brought boyfriends to family dinners, who fit the mold they'd carved for the perfect granddaughter. Don't make a scene, my mother whispered, suddenly beside me with her worried expression and trembling hands. You know how Linda gets when she's stressed. But her eyes weren't on me, they were scanning the room, calculating who might be watching, who might be judging our family's dirty laundry. I wasn't making a scene. I was drowning in one. The funeral had been beautiful, everything grandmother would have wanted. White lilies, her favorite hymns, stories about her strength during the Depression, her courage raising 4 children alone after grandfather died young. But now, 3 hours later, the grief had been packaged away and the real business had begun. Dividing up her life like it was a garage sale. I need some air, I said, setting down my untouched plate of funeral casserole. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody followed. Outside, the October wind cut through my black dress, but I didn't shiver. I kept walking past the rental cars, past the family members smoking on the porch, past the neighbors who'd come to pay respects. My hands were steady, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. Not broken, clarified. I drove to the one place that still felt like home, grandmother's house. The key was still under the ceramic frog by the front steps, just where she'd kept it for 40 years. Inside, everything smelled like lavender and old books. Her reading glasses still sat on the kitchen table beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. The silence felt different now, not peaceful, but expectant. I found the letter in her bedroom, tucked inside the jewelry box that Linda had already claimed. My name was written on the envelope in grandmother's careful script, dated just 2 weeks before she died. My dearest Maya, it began, if you're reading this, then Linda has probably already made her move. I know my daughter well. She's never understood that love can't be divided like property, that memories aren't inherited through bloodlines but through connection. My hands trembled as I read on. The jewelry in that box is beautiful, but it's not your real inheritance. Check behind the loose floorboard in my closet. Look for the board that creaks when you step on it. You used to hide there during hide and seek, remember? I remember. The floorboard lifted easily, revealing a metal box I'd never seen before. Inside were documents, photographs, and a key attached to a small brass tag marked Security Deposit Box Number 247, First National Bank. The photographs showed a young version of my grandmother standing in front of buildings I didn't recognize, holding keys, shaking hands with men in suits. The documents were property deeds, business licenses, stock certificates, all dated from the 1960s through the 1990s, all bearing her name, Eleanor Chen, Property Management LLC, my grandmother, the woman who served tea in china cups and grew prize-winning roses, had been quietly building a real estate empire for 30 years. The final document was her will, the real one, not the version Linda had read at the lawyer's office. This one left everything to me. 12 rental properties, 3 commercial buildings, and investment accounts worth more than I could process in that moment. At the bottom, in her handwriting, for Maya, who listened to my stories and understood. That strength comes in many forms. I sat on her bedroom floor for a long time, surrounded by the truth Linda had tried to bury. The jewelry, the furniture, the house itself, those were decoys. The real treasure had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the granddaughter who'd inherited more than anyone knew. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to First National Bank. The security deposit box held more documents, more keys, and a single photograph of grandmother and me at my college graduation. On the back, she'd written, "The proudest day of my life watching you become the woman I always knew you could be." But there was something else in that box. A thick folder marked Linda's debts. Inside were copies of loan applications, promissory notes, and payment records spanning 15 years. My aunt had been borrowing against grandmother's estate, using the properties as collateral without permission. The amounts were staggering enough to lose everything if she'd been found out. Grandmother had known. She'd documented everything, kept every receipt, every forged signature, every lie Linda had told to cover her tracks. She'd been protecting the family's real assets while pretending to be a simple widow who collected jewelry and baked cookies. I drove back to the funeral home, where the reception was winding down. Linda was holding court in the corner, still wearing grandmother's pearl necklace like a trophy. Jessica was showing off the engagement ring to anyone who'd listen. They looked so satisfied, so certain they'd won. "Linda," I said, walking up to their little circle, "we need to talk." She turned with that patronizing smile she'd perfected over the years. "Maya, dear, I know you're upset about the jewelry, but it's not about the jewelry," I said, pulling out a manila folder. "It's about the $400,000 you've borrowed against grandmother's properties without her consent." The color drained from her face. Jessica stopped talking mid-sentence. The small group around them shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in atmosphere. "I don't know what you're talking about," Linda stammered, but her voice had lost its confident edge. I opened the folder and pulled out a copy of the most recent loan document. First Trust Bank, $75,000, secured against the duplex on Maple Street. Your signature, but forged authorization from the property owner. I looked up at her. "That's federal fraud, Linda." The pearl necklace suddenly looked like a noose around her throat. "You don't understand," she whispered, glancing around at the faces watching our conversation. "I was protecting the family assets, making sure they were being used properly." "You were stealing," I said quietly, "from your own mother." While she was dying, Jessica stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Maya, you can't prove any of this. You're just upset because you didn't get what you wanted." I smiled then, not out of cruelty but out of clarity. "I got exactly what I wanted, Jessica. I got everything." I pulled out the real will and set it on the table between us. "Grandmother left me the entire estate, all of it. The houses, the businesses, the accounts, everything you thought you were stealing from." Linda grabbed the document with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the pages. I watched her realize that every property she'd used as collateral, every building she'd counted on inheriting, every dollar she'd borrowed against it, all belonged to me now. "This can't be legal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's very legal," I replied. "Witnessed, notarized, filed with the probate court yesterday morning." "But here's the thing, Linda, I'm not heartless. I'm willing to work out a payment plan for what you owe. Family rates, reasonable terms." She looked up at me, something desperate flickering in her eyes. "What do you want?" "I want honesty," I said. "I want acknowledgement of what you did, and I want you to understand that grandmother saw through every lie, every manipulation, every time you tried to play the dutiful daughter while robbing her blind." The room had gone completely quiet. Even the staff had stopped cleaning to listen. "The jewelry?" I asked, looking at Jessica. "Keep it. Consider it a gift from your new landlord." Jessica's face went pale. Landlord, the apartment complex where you live? I own that to now. Funny how things work out. I gathered my documents and stood up. You'll be hearing from my lawyer about the repayment schedule. And Linda? I turned back to face her one last time. Next time you want to call someone impractical, make sure you understand what they're actually inheriting. I walked out of that funeral home the same way I'd walked out of grandmother's house as a child, knowing I'd always be welcome back, but no longer needing permission to leave. 3 months later, I hosted my first family dinner. Not at my apartment, not at some neutral restaurant, but in grandmother's house, my house now. I'd kept everything exactly as she'd left it. Her reading glasses on the kitchen table, her crossword puzzle stacked neatly by her favorite chair, her rose garden tended with the same care she'd shown it. Linda came, of course. She had to. She was still paying off her debts, and I'd made family dinners part of our agreement. Not as punishment, but as rebuilding. Jessica came too, quieter now, wearing simpler jewelry. She'd moved out of my apartment complex, found something she could afford on her own. We sat around grandmother's dining table, the same one where she'd taught me to play cards and told me stories about the old country. But this time, I was the one serving tea in china cups, the one deciding who got seconds, the one steering the conversation. To Eleanor, I said, raising my cup in a toast, who taught us that the best revenge is living well. Linda's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her cup. Jessica managed a small smile, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged. They'd tried to take my inheritance, but instead, they'd given me something better, the knowledge that I was stronger than they'd ever imagined, and that grandmother had known it all along. The real treasure wasn't the jewelry or the money or even the properties. It was the understanding that love, true love, doesn't divide people into categories of deserving and undeserving. It sees potential where others see problems, strength where others see silence. Grandmother had been watching, planning, protecting not just her assets, but her legacy. And her legacy wasn't in the buildings or the bank accounts. It was in me.